Welcome everybody to All the Things with Lane and Lani. Today we have the pleasure of having on the podcast two never retiring journalists that have recently started their own true crime podcast, CrimeCasters. It's the newest and one of the more interesting podcasts about true crime that you will find, so please check them out. You can find them on Facebook and their website, crimecastersnetwork.com. If you're a fan of true crime, stay tuned here to listen to two seasoned journalists as we delve into the processes they put into each show. And we know we're excited about it. We're interested, very interested in all that. So please welcome CrimeCasters hosts Ronnie Dahl and Alysia Sofios.
You said it right. I can't believe it.
All right.
Yeah. I think you're the first one ever. So
Really?
Awesome.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. We are, like I said, we're uber excited, or more excited on her end, because she's a true crime advocate and just nonstop listening to them. And I think she's got a screw loose. But now that there's more people like her out there that I know I can talk to, then
I'm not that weird.
you're
See?
not that weird.
Yeah. So so you guys were journalists, or you still are journalists, right? And how did you decide to just start a podcast one day?
Alysia, do you want to take this, since this is really your start off point?
Because I'm a little crazy, is what Ronnie's trying to say politely, is that I'm a little bit obsessed. And so literally Ronnie and I worked together at a little Fox affiliate in Lansing, Michigan, where we were. And Ronnie was like the reporter who was afraid of nothing. Like, she would knock on any door. She would, the other things that when you're starting out, you're kind of like, ooh, are they going to want to talk to us? And Ronnie didn't care. So I always loved that about her. And over the years, I covered, both of us went our separate ways. We covered a ton of cases in all different markets. But I always had this thing in the back of my head that if I ever could work with Ronnie again, I would love to. And then I had this idea, because every reporter has a case that just sticks with you, right? Like, for some reason you go out to the scene and it hits you differently, because we're supposed to always compartmentalize, but sometimes we become human too. I know it's shocking, but sometimes we do. And so there was a story that I kept calling on, like, is it solved yet? Is it solved yet? And then I was actually living in California at the time. The pandemic happened. I came back to Michigan and I just stayed here. And when we were like locked down, I was so bored and I was like, what can I do? So I started calling on cold cases, which everyone was like, can't you just make sourdough bread like a normal person? But I started calling on cold cases, and then one of my next calls was Ronnie, and she would hear from me every few years because I would like bug her. I think the last time I pitched the idea to her was when she was at ATF, and she can tell you about that in a minute. She's like, I legally cannot do that. And I'm like, ugh. So during the pandemic, I was kind of like, all right, you really you're going to try to come up with an excuse not to do this with me now? Like, we're locked down. You literally can't go anywhere. So I knew that she was able to, and she finally caved and was like, okay, let's do this. So it became official.
And for us, I think it's, because like she said, we're journalists at heart, but these cases, we're human too. And anyone who says you're not, and I remember like one time being like, can I hug a family? Can I hug them? Like, you're supposed to be this interview, but you can't. We're human. And I'm just a regular person. I'm from Tiffin, Ohio. I come from a family of 9. I have a twin sister, and we're the youngest of the 9. Neither one of my parents had like a high school degree. We're blue collar, just salt of the earth people. And so when you're telling someone like, you've got to be like this journalist and play this part, but you're standing in front of people and their lives have changed forever. How do you not be human? How do you not hug them? And so but I remember having those conversations. It seems weird to talk about it now, because I'm like, I don't care. I hug everyone, especially coming out of the pandemic. If you were in front of me at Starbucks, I was giving you a hug.
Well, that was going to be one of my
So-
questions were your tactics more of a coming from the side of compassion and you meant it, or was it more like a paparazzi? I'm going to dive in there. I'm going to throw myself in there no matter what the cost.
No,
Go ahead.
so and Alysia and I have two very different encounters with the journalism world. And I think for us, we kind of grew up, like for me, I was a Nancy Drew person, and you guys know, being in Toledo, the author lived there for years, and that was kind of my thing. I was like, oh, wanted to be a detective, or I didn't know, but it was journalists. There are these rules that come along with journalism and that you're taught, and like Alysia said, not be human. But I don't think it's for paparazzi. I think at the end of the day, you're just being a real reporter. And there are a lot of reporters that don't do that. They won't do that. But I will say, I'm kind of known for putting myself out there. When I worked in Toledo, I think I remember the first story I did, I got so much pushback on, is we were doing a story about the underage prostitution that was going on in Toledo. I don't know if you guys remember, but Toledo's kind of a pipeline.
It is.
Oh,
Human, they call it human trafficking now, but prostitution of underage girls was 75. So we did a huge series, and I'm the reporter who, I believe the story doesn't happen, 9 to 5. So I would go out on the weekends to the truck stops there in Ottawa, and try to, see what is really going on. What is the real story? And I remember a cop pulled me over. He was like, "What are you doing?" Because I had a little video camera. Oh, and I never tell my bosses either, by the way. So
That's the key. You ask for forgiveness, not permission. And
Right.
I
you-
like that. That's
Right.
my
Yeah.
motto too.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure.
right. But you're trying to get the real story, and so I did the story, and we went out, and so it was this big series, because this is at the height. I think Toledo was getting national attention at that point about the human trafficking and the underage girls. But I was trying to get to the heart of the story, the real story, not the press conference story, not the one interview story, but the real story. And so it took me countless phone calls and cookie drop-offs to the Toledo Police Department, so that everyone knows, like, I just make cookies and deliver them. Well, I don't really make them, I buy them, but I package them so it looks like I made them.
Oh, that's funny.
By
And then
the
everyone
way,
thinks they're homemade.
I have never gotten a cookie from Ronnie yet. So it is true. Now that I think about it, that is what you're known for. And where are my cookies?
Hey, she didn't
Well,
need anything
they're really,
from just being a
right.
part.
They're really from Kroger. I mean,
I still
but-
want one.
So I would do, and so, because you guys are from Perrysburg, you've been around for a while. So there was a story in the competition. They did a story where they went out with the vice unit in Toledo, with Toledo PD. And there was a story about a city worker who was in a street sweeper who picked up a prostitute, and they were along and they were videotaping, and it did not go over well.
Wow.
So Toledo PD, politics get involved in these things. So Toledo PD at that point was like, no more ride-alongs. We've cut them out. No way.
Huh.
So I'm working on the story, and I'm like, no, I this is an important part of the story, is what are you doing from a police side to try to combat this? And so I kept dropping off cookies all the time to their higher ups. And they were just like, oh my God, I don't know what you did, but we have to take you on a ride along. I'm like, okay, let's go, but the officers, they didn't like it. They were ticked. They didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So we go out. It was a quick thing. We really didn't get anything. They were just doing it to tell their bosses, hey, we took the crazy reporter with us and all is good. So we get back to the station. At that time, I was still with Fox 47. So we get back to the station, And I look at the photog and I go, well, that sucked. And he goes, yeah. And I go, give me 30 minutes. And he goes, what? And so I went and because we had done the ride along, right? So I knew what the police were saying and what they were looking for. And they were saying, you know, like, they knew, like, people picking up prostitutes, they knew if you were a cop, if you had good teeth. So I go in, I put on crappy clothes, tease my hair, put mascara on my teeth.
Oh my God.
And I said to the photog, I'm like, come on, let's go. And he goes, what? I go, yeah, let's go. And he's like, what? Are you not going to make a, no, let's just go. So we went back out, and I had a wireless mic on. So he was within a distance of me. So he's kind of parked, you know, around the corner there. God, what was the street in Toledo where they were picking up? It's the big prostitution area. It was cold though. It was so cold, which helped because I could put my hood up. So, but, and you could tell the first time, like I was super nervous. I didn't know what to say. I was like, oh, so I started walking up and down the street and I didn't have a lot of competition because of the weather. So it was just really kind of me. And the guy pulls over and I'm nervous and I'm like, looking for a good time? You know, I didn't know what to say, you know. But
you watch Pretty Woman, you know what to say. Come on.
I was gonna say she based all of her sex worker knowledge on her childhood movie viewing of Pretty Woman.
Exactly.
But you know, and the point of it was, so it, you know, we went like a while, but really we were only out there for 30 minutes and I couldn't believe how many people were pulling over. In fact, I still remember the line from the story, and it was like the drive-through hooker service was open. And so, and you know, I never got in a car with anyone. I didn't, you know, my photographer at the time was very adamant about, hey, I need you to stay from this point to this point because I need to see you at all times. Right. And you know, we knew the police weren't out on the street patrolling because we just left them when they were going home. But we did have a source that was on, you know, that we could call personally to say, hey, we're in trouble or whatever. Because safety is, you know, it's got to be an issue. But at the end of the day, it was like, you get ticked because when you're looking at human trafficking and prostitution, everything's on the female. But no one was doing anything about the people pulling over.
Right.
So it was like, so I remember the one guy, I was like, you know, I was like, hey, you know, like how much, you know, and he had to go to an ATM. I still have that episode on video, by the way. And he said something like 25 bucks had to go. I guess I charged too much. I didn't know what to charge. So he was going to the ATM, but one guy stopped, and then you know, once it got to that awkward point, I had to say, hey, I'm Ronnie Dahl. I'm with, you know, the TV station.
Oh my
You're
God.
on camera right now.
What
are you doing? And he was, you know, some of them would drive off, but this one guy, he talked and he said, yeah, you know, it's what I do. You know, he explained, you know, why he was out there.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, you know, and we did not like, because we blurred their plates. But I think that was kind of my first big story where they would say it was an integrative, you know, the reporter involved stories, which are pretty commonplace now. But it was more to say, this isn't about the women. We knew we weren't going to get it from the cops. So let me show you what's really going on. We couldn't believe what's going on, but yet none of the Johns are being picked up, but all the women are being picked up.
Crazy.
So after that, then Toledo did a big, you know, sting where they went after the Johns. But I had a ton of pushback on that story.
Really?
Was it more because you put yourself in danger, so to speak, to put yourself out there, or was it because it's not like you actually caught anybody that was on the city council payroll or anything crazy like that? Expose
right. No, I think for people, they were saying that we were kind of doing it for shock and awe, and that wasn't the intent at all. It was, we knew we weren't going to get what we needed to tell the story. So let's show people how easy it really is. Like, and we videotape me getting dressed and then going out. And within 30 minutes on this freezing cold night, something stupid like 15, 20 cars pulled over to try to pick me up in Toledo. And you're like, so it was really more to say, hey, let's show what happens. And this is the real story. Right. So for us as journalists, it's sometimes you have to put yourself in the story to get the story.
Yeah.
And it's not like my intent wasn't to make that story about me. It was, the intent was to show what the guys are doing and to make Toledo police to understand, stop going after the women,
right?
Start going after the men.
Yeah.
It's supply and demand, right?
Right.
Oh, sure.
So Alysia, please tell me that you have a similar story where you put on an alligator outfit and tried to catch poachers on camera.
Yes, that is exactly what happened. Exactly. No, I mean, honestly, I always kind of felt like that was my role as a journalist, I always kind of gravitated toward the personal stories, the stories about people, the stories where I could like connect with somebody. And that was always kind of my forte. They would always kind of send me in and be like, Alysia can always get the, exclusive interview, because I just approached it like a person, Mm-hmm. So I think that was always the positive part about me as a journalist, but it also was a negative part because we found I couldn't really separate myself from stories. And so that led to ethical issues. So the story that I'm known for the most was, I was in Michigan at Ronnie's station. I actually left the station for a station in California, which our station wasn't very happy about, Ronnie, I know. You got the brunt of that too. But so I went to a station in California and I immediately started covering Scott Peterson. It was in the viewing area. So as a big true crime fan, I already was like, oh, wow, I'm going from covering in Michigan, not as exciting, to covering Scott Peterson and American Idol. And I was like, woo, this is awesome. So I was going through all of those motions, and then I find out about a story that was unfolding. I heard about it first before any of the other media. It was a standoff that turned into a mass murder, and a man had murdered 9 of his children.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it became a global story overnight. So people were flying in from literally every country in the world to cover this story. We found out a lot. He had been having children with his daughters. It was a cult-like situation. This man was just pure evil. Right. And he had really sequestered his family from society. So they had never been to school. They'd never been in the outside world. So then this happens, and all of a sudden cameras from all over the world are on them. They'd always been taught that the outside world was evil and bad, very similar to the Turpin family that is making headlines now. But at the time, we hadn't really seen anything like this. So I'm thrust into the story. I'm covering it. I'm like, I can't believe this is the biggest story in the nation right now. And I'm here and I heard about it first. And so at first that kicks in, your journalistic instinct is to like, get the story, right? I want to know what other journalists don't know. I want to beat the national guys because this is our backyard. We should own this story. So at first, that's how you approach it. And then you see or meet the victims, the survivors, and it completely changes. And this was a story that just like punched me in the face. I was like, oh my God, like this is real. Like these are talking about real people. And so as soon as I met them, they took kind of a liking to me for some reason. And I started talking to them and they started giving me exclusive interviews. And then I was kind of synonymous with that story. And so it kind of became part of my journalistic identity. But in the process of getting to know them, they were homeless. And at the time I had a pet ferret because it was the only pet I was allowed to have in Michigan. with my apartment. They were like, you can have a ferret. I was like, I'll take it. So I had this ferret. I smuggled him into California because they're illegal in California.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Even though Arnold Schwarzenegger went on to become governor, and he's known for that movie Kindergarten Cop with the ferret. So we always tried to like appeal to that. Anyway, sidebar. But my ferret had his own room in my apartment in California. And I'm talking to these people on the phone that have just lost 9 of their siblings and they're homeless. And I was like, so I moved the survivors in with me. That's the long
Oh my
story.
God.
And
Wow.
we ended up living together for 7 years.
Holy cow.
And we wrote a book about our journey and their story,
Wow.
which is just remarkable. So
That just gave me
in that
goosebumps.
process, and I was on 2020 one time about this, and I remember the reporter Jay Shadler, whom is like the pinnacle of, you know, hard-hitting journalism, looked at me and he's like, what went through your mind when you let the sources move it? You know, he was like scolding me, and I was like, I'm so sorry. But no, I was like, when it happened, at that moment, I remember hanging up the phone with them, telling them, you guys can come over, hanging up the phone, sitting on my bed and having this like deep breath where I was like, okay, my journalism career is probably going to go in a different direction from here on out. I really did think it was a temporary situation, but then when they came in, we quickly became like family, and it just progressed. So my career took kind of a pivot there, and that was highly scrutinized at the time. Not a lot of people knew about it. It was a secret for a long time, until the book came out, of course, and everyone knew the story. So yeah, I think Ronnie and I both have a tendency to jump into a story feet first. And I think that makes us great crime solvers, and it helps with some of these cases, because so often you'll hear a true crime podcast and it feels very, you know, you're giving out the deepest, darkest secrets of people's lives and talking about the worst thing that's ever happened to them and ever will happen to them. And it sometimes feels removed. It sometimes feels like, I sometimes think, I wonder what the victims' families are thinking listening to this, especially on some of the podcasts where, you know, it's more comedic and they're laughing or they're drinking wine, and, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's just, I think Ronnie and I wanted to approach it in more of a personal way, where we've actually talked to the people involved, and we're trying to like look for justice and kind of do it our way, the way that we couldn't do it in mainstream media.
Well, that's cool. I listen to a ton of different true crime podcasts, and I've been listening to yours, and I do like your style a lot. I mean, you don't get that chit chat in the beginning, you know, you get right to the story, and you can tell that you two are journalists, but there's still a personal spin on it. And I thoroughly enjoyed the ones I listened to. And what was crazy is they were ones that I had never heard before. And I mean, so many get repeated just because it's what's popular. It's what people are always looking for. But like the lady that put her husband in the acid, that was just crazy. I told him, you better be careful and be nice to me, because I know how to do that now.
Exactly. Acid lady.
Yes.
That was one that Ronnie and I went back and forth with. We were like, we've got to do Acid Lady. And then I hadn't touched that case in so many years, and I just wrote to her in prison just to see if she had any new information. And then when she was like, yeah, I did it, I was like, what? So, and then, you know, we had a little bit of fun with her blog, just because it's like, wow.
Craziness. Yeah.
Let's say, how do you select the cases? I mean, do you have a certain year range, or are you guys pulling from old things that you covered? I mean, how do you go about selecting them?
It's funny because my husband comes into my office, and like right here to the side of me is a chalkboard, and it's like all these cases that I want to cover. So for us as reporters, you know, the original thing was kind of like, hey, let's go back to some of the stories we covered as reporters. And I have a million. And sadly, what happens when you start in a small market, you want the big murder because then it's the lead story.
Sure.
But one of the ones I'm trying to look into is because I'm from Tiffin. It's a small town, is Casey Cole. She lived not far from where I lived. So, but you look at these cases that we covered as reporters, and they either, even the ones that are solved, they have answers that are or questions that are unanswered, or there's a story afterwards as well. It doesn't just end with a conviction if there is a conviction, but a lot of them are unsolved. And we know that this true crime world that is emerging, not only in podcasts, but also with all the streaming services, can really help bring attention to these cases. Because when it gets picked up locally, after a couple years, it's hard to get these cases covered again.
Right.
So I think for us, like, you sit down and you're like, oh, what about that case? What about that case? And when I started out, I kept like a journal every day, the story I covered that day, the name of the people involved and their phone numbers. So I still have mine, by the way, from Toledo, including, like, back then, the tape number, like, because it was before it was, digital. It was on a tape.
Oh, yeah.
And then the tape number that it was logged on, because if you ever had to go back, it was hard to find the tape. And I still have those notebooks. My husband's like, do you want to get rid of those? I'm like, no. The Jeep shooting is another one. Like, I kept in touch with that family. Just sending them notes. A lot of times I would just send them notes on the anniversary to say, hey, I'm just thinking about you, because we know for the families it doesn't end then. So for us as journalists, you have this long list and you sit down and you think about them. And when you get to a major city like Detroit, the hard thing about it is you have so many, whereas when you're in a smaller market, there aren't that many, so they stick with you. But in Detroit, there are weekends that you would come in and you would just break down and you'd be like, I need a fluff story. I can't cover another crime today. Another murder. I can't. But for the families, they don't get that option. So they stick with you, and then you just sit down, and I'm sitting here, I'm looking at 55 that I could do tomorrow.
Oh, really?
And sometimes we do stories that we've always wanted to cover.
Wow.
Like the Sherry Papini story. I always knew that there was something very suspicious about that whole thing. I was always like, she didn't get kidnapped. I know it. No one would ever listen to me. And now with the new information, I've been making calls. And so the podcast has given us kind of a platform where we can now call and say, I'm from CrimeCasters Network, I'm following up on this case. So we can be in the mix again on some of the stories that are happening now or unfolding now, or stories again that happened nationally that we never had a chance to cover, but are able to now. So that's been great. So really the world of crime is our oyster.
Yeah, absolutely. Does it take you, since these are, some of them are cases you've done personally, like, does it take you, because you do it once a week? Is that how often you release? Does it take you a week to research them and kind of get all your notes down and get ready for a show, or how does that work?
Or sometimes a year, or some of them take, it's very rare that we're going to have a case that we've only looked at for a week. They usually take months of leading up. So I probably have 10 to 12 cases that I'm actively investigating, pursuing right now. And I know Ronnie is the same way. So they're always in the pipeline. You're making calls, you're setting up interviews, you're talking to you're submitting FOIA requests, which cannot happen in a week.
Right.
Some of them take months and months. So we have a lot of cases that we have answers to and have done interviews on, but we're holding until we get more information. So it's just kind of like we decide what we want to do that week. But no, I wish we could do a story in a week, but I don't think that's realistic.
I didn't think it was possible. I just couldn't figure out how the timeline worked, but I guess, do you guys are you both still journalists outside of this? Or, I mean, do you have other jobs outside of the podcast, I guess?
We don't right now,
Okay.
but so I do so many things. Like I do, because I took a detour from journalism for a little bit and went to work for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, a federal law enforcement agency, and became their PIO. So, and when I was in that aspect, the biggest thing was law enforcement training. So you have a lot of side things going on. So I do like media training for law enforcement or nonprofits, things of that nature. So you're constantly juggling. And you know what's crazy too is like I spend so much of my time with people sending me cases because they can't get them covered by mainstream media. And then like I'll do most of the research and then hand it off to a reporter and say, hey, I've done everything, try to turn this story. But I'm working like, with another guy who got kind of wrapped up in, let's just say, a federal corruption investigation. He went to federal prison, he got out, and he was a defense attorney who was running for a judge. He got out and he is writing a book that's about to be released. So I've been working with him on his book, doing the research for that. And so you really, when you go into this podcast world, you have to keep juggling all these other things in the world as well, because when you're starting a podcast, it's not paying.
No, we know that.
Yeah.
Yes.
We are unfortunately well aware.
It gives us kind of sets us up for if we want to, a lot of podcasters or a lot of journalists who have gotten out of mainstream media also will take a case that's very important to them, do a ton of research and turn it into a docu-series for a network. Since we are both in the TV world, those are also things that we're kind of doing on the side on some of the cases that require more of a deep dive that can't be told in 40 minutes like we do each week. So something that could turn into a documentary or a docu-series that have too many sources for us to include in just one story.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Does make sense. So what's the obsession? Why does it seem to be more women than men? And this is just a generalization because I don't know. I know more women that talk about true crime or are fascinated with true crime or true crime is in their lives. What's the obsession with the true crimes before I give my own explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I've had people say, okay, you're a woman and most of the true crime happens to women. Why do you want to listen to that? And now that you have kids, do you want to hear about kids? And I still do. I don't know why. Like, what is wrong with me? I mean, can you guys relate? Do you feel like it's more women that like it than men?
Well, in starting the podcast, we, absolutely did our research as far as your targeted audience. And it typically is women 18 to 54 that has this interest in true crime. I think for us, so we're kind of approaching it a little bit different in the fact that we want to tell the stories of the people that we have met along the way, or even be able to be a voice or get answers for families today. So for us, it's not just true crime. It's not a podcast. It's reaching out to the families and allowing them to tell their stories, or even if not the family, being able to do it from the viewpoint of a detective. Like we recently interviewed a detective with a horrific case out of Detroit, and telling their side of the story. And so for us, it's a journalism thing because, typically if you were to say to us, oh, you have 35 minutes to tell a story and we run out of time, you'd be like, what? Yeah. Because you're lucky if you get a minute 15 at the top of a newscast. And if it's what we call sweeps time, ratings times, and it's a promotable, you might get 2.5 minutes. And here we are being allowed to tell these stories in a 35-40 minute format and allowing the people that are involved to get their voice heard, whether it is the victim, a member of the victim's family, or a detective or a prosecutor, just giving a new angle on all of these stories, because we see the headlines, but as reporters, there's so much more that goes on beyond the headlines.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's two very distinct parts of true crime. There is the obsession that is kind of fun. And that sounds weird, like you were saying, but there's like the merchandise, like there's a big conference called CrimeCon. Ronnie and I will both be there this year. I went last year in Austin, and everyone's walking around with a shirt that says like, here for the alibi, or the husband did it, so there is like a merchandise side, and there's something about this true crime community where it's like, that's so weird. You guys are all, fans of, what are you fans of? Rape and murder? I mean,
Yeah.
no, of course not. But we find this community of like-minded people. And I can tell you, it's the nicest people I've ever met. They truly are caring people that care about justice and the outcome of these stories. And I think sometimes people looking in are like, oh, that's so weird. Like, you guys are glorifying murder on that spectrum, right? To say you're a true crime fan. But there's also camaraderie, friendship, this community, like I said, and of course the undying love for Keith Morrison, in which I possess. And Ronnie actually surprised me with a life-size Keith Morrison cutout.
No way.
Wow.
I don't know if you have 2 minutes for a quick story.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Absolutely.
It's hard for me to talk about. Ronnie's tired of hearing this, but it is still like difficult for me to talk about. I have like PTSD about this. So I've always been obsessed with Keith Morrison. Okay. I just have. He's just like an idol of mine. I love the way he tells stories. He really gets at the heart. Also, this one guy that I always wanted to interview, but it was my fellow reporter's story. It was this guy named Dave Hawk. He was convicted of killing his wife, Debbie Hawk, but he was just a really bad guy. Aside from being a wife killer, he was also just like a bad guy. And Keith Morrison he was very, very narcissistic, and Keith Morrison just like gave it to him. And I was like a fan after that. I was like, yes, you said all the things we want to say, yelling at the TV to this guy. So anyway, always been a fan. I moved to Laguna Beach into a new place. Okay. I had moved south to Laguna Beach. And of course, every morning before work, I would go get a coffee, and I wanted to find my local coffee shop. So I was driving around. I was like, this is going to be my local coffee shop. So I walk in, order a coffee, and I'm sitting there, and there's a beautiful view to the right. And I look out, and I see like this mirage of like this beautiful flowing white hair in the wind.
Oh.
And it looked like so much like Keith Morrison. And I was like, oh my God, my eyes are playing tricks on me. That guy looks like Keith Morrison. And I'm laughing. And the barista leans in, and he's like, that is him. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, he literally lives a couple doors down. He's here every morning.
Oh my
wow.
gosh.
I died. So listen, I've interviewed a lot of big celebrities. I was an American Idol reporter for 10 years.
Oh wow.
They all came through. We would get to interview them. I've never been starstruck until Keith Morrison. So I immediately go outside and drink my coffee next to him. He's reading the newspaper, of course, like he is in my dreams. Like of course he's reading the newspaper, and has the most beautiful dog you've ever seen. Like perfect, just like sipping his latte with a paper. It's like literally the stuff my dreams are made of. So I'm sitting there, and in my head, I'm like, because I've seen videos where he doesn't like people to approach him. He's like, when I'm out in the world, I want to have me time. I don't have a lot of free time. I want me time. So I'm like, okay, but I'm not just another fan. Like I'm in the world. Like we're together. Like we're comrades. And like I wrote a book about true crime, and I've been in 2020. I feel like I'm okay. So I craft this story in my head, and I'm going to walk up and be like, Mr. Morrison, it's great to see you. I'm your new neighbor. I'm going to be living here for a while. I understand that you get your coffee here. I just want to let you know, you've been a big influence in my career. And, I've gone into true crime, and I really appreciate you setting the bar so high for all of us. It's very nice to meet you. Thank you so much. That sounds good,
Yeah.
right?
Short and
Well
simple.
rehearsed, yeah.
So I walk up and I'm like, and I'm standing there for an incredibly long time. Like, he's not dropping the newspaper and it's super awkward. And I'm like, and he drops the paper and he looks up and he pulls his glasses down and he's like, yes. And I was like, and I drop to the ground, pet his dog and say, what's your dog's name?
Oh my gosh.
I lost it. I could, like, when he made eye contact, I completely lost everything I was going to say. And he was like, Jasper. And I was like, have a nice day. And I just walked.
Oh wow.
I never talked to him again. I saw him every morning and I would just nod. Good morning. That was it. I just didn't earn the right. I crumbled.
Oh man. I'll say
But
life
so
is-
Ronnie bought me a cardboard cutout and I really appreciate it. So like, he's in my office and he watches me write my scripts every week.
I'll say that-
Oh my gosh.
That helps. I'm sure we
That's
could get
great.
someone to imitate his voice and have him say, "That's a good job you're doing there."
Oh, that was pretty good.
in his creepy
That was
tone.
pretty good.
I've never really been a fan of Keith Morrison just because he's got that creepy tone. And he inflects his voice, and he's just a strange character for me. But if you need a fat head of him up in your office, that's awesome.
That's pretty cool. We're just one.
What's your favorite true crime show?
I listen to a lot of probably like the top like Crime Junkies and Big Mad True Crime. I love Going West. That's like one of my new favorites. And Crime Salad. I mean, there's just a lot. Invisible Choir. I probably have 50 on rotation that I listen to all the time.
Wow, we'll have to check some of those out. We're so busy now that we haven't been able to listen as much.
Yeah.
Oh, you should. You guys should be setting the bar. You guys got your own show. You should be doing your own thing. That's great.
You guys are now in my rotation. So
That's right.
Awesome.
Yes.
What are some of the cases that you guys follow or you'd like to see covered more? Are there any?
I'll say I'm not as big into it as she is. She'll come on after a hard day's work, and I just listened to a podcast where so and so killed the kids and blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, wait, Nate. No, I don't want to hear about kids. I'll listen to people being killed all day, every day, no matter what form or faction. But you start entering kids, and I just don't want to listen to it. So.
So you think she's crazy? You could say
No,
that.
a
It's
little
okay.
Yeah.
No, not necessarily crazy. I just think there's an obsession there. I think there's obsession with either the victimhood, but you guys just brought to light the fact that people are tuning in and listening to these things because they want to hear the bad people that did horrible things brought to justice, or someone being caught and or punished for it. So I think maybe that's the main reason why a lot of people listen to them. More than just the sick ways of people being killed,
Well, the internet has changed the world because it's not even just listening to the stories, but people are getting involved now and actually helping to solve some of these cases. So, but we couldn't have done that 15, 20 years ago, right? I mean, you have Google Earth now, you have just so many tools that are at your fingertips. And the more eyes you have on a case, the more ways you can see a case. And maybe those are different than what the detective saw. And so we are seeing more police departments are starting to get on board with this. So we had a police department here, Troy Police Department, they had a cold case. And so for one of the detectives, she was going to retire, and that was her thing. Before she retired, she said, I want to try to solve this. So they released it on their social media platform, but they were doing little bits at a time. Every week, it was a new part of the case. And because they know that there's this entire new world out there, and you may get on the local news to talk about it, but it could be a national case. You know, especially if we're talking about, you know, a cold case. I mean, that person could have moved away. And so you are seeing more police departments get engaged in this internet world of true crime to try to help solve these cases. Now there is a fine line because, you know, sometimes things happen that aren't accurate and then you're just bogging down police resources. So there is a line, but it's making a difference in the world for some of these families.
Yeah.
So keep listening.
Cool. Oh yeah.
Keep listening, Lani. Go
I
ahead.
will. You know, I always said my dream job would have been to be a detective, but I'm not really sure I would have been that good a one.
No, the first time you see your first body,
yeah,
it's and I, you know, I've only seen them as a reporter.
yeah,
I haven't had to do what some of these detectives have to do, and I can tell you, for some of them, it stays with them. It stays with them forever. You know, as reporters, we're typically kept back, but on occasion, we do see a body, or maybe, you know, before the police rope off the area or something of that nature, and it's not good. It's not good. So you wouldn't want to be a detective. Just
yeah.
stay an armchair detective.
Yeah, I'll do
Yes,
that. I will
armchair
do that.
detective. And I think it's true. And we talked a little bit about why we're a little more serious than some of the other podcasts out there. And I think it's because Ronnie and I have both been to crime scenes, and we sometimes get there before the police. We see the emotion at a crime scene: screaming parents, screaming spouse, hugging a murder victim, and police pulling them away, neighbors screaming, frantic, kids crying, babies crying. A parent was just murdered. Maybe they witnessed it. We've seen those things. So it's hard to tell the stories in the same way if you've never been exposed to that.
Right.
And I think that was one of the things when we see people kind of blending entertainment. Like, we have conversations, you've heard us, we have opinions, we talk, we, you know, we laugh about certain things in cases. Some things are funny in cases, but you can tell sometimes when you're listening to some of those podcasts where you're like, they've never been to a crime scene.
No.
They haven't seen the emotion of what that does to people. And maybe that's a good thing for some people to have never experienced that. But that's why we kind of approach it in a way that we hope is respectful to everyone and yet still entertaining. At the end of the day, we are a podcast. We want people to listen. It is entertainment, but it has a purpose and people can help. I mean, one of the episodes we did today, a donor in the community actually donated money to the sheriff's office, and it's solving 2 cold cases. It already found the identity of a Jane Doe.
Oh my
and
God.
So those are people who sit back, listen to these cases, and want to help. And that is the beauty of this true crime obsession, is that it really is bringing closure to so many families.
That's amazing. I know I hate when I listen to one and it's unsolved. You know, the one you did about the Bigfoot killer or the Bigfoot kidnapping, and like those guys should be in jail, but they're not in jail. And that just drives me nuts. But I do like when they come back and they bring an update and say, okay, due to some of your help of our audience or whatever it may be, you know, DNA testing, and they're now bringing these people to justice. And I think that's the coolest part.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're hoping. I think for us, because you guys obviously being close to Monroe, Nevaeh Buchanan, that's a case that is so close to so many people, especially when you get behind the scenes and you know things that we can't say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard on the family, and they've been saying that there's going to be a resolution to that one for how many years now, and it still hasn't happened. So we try to bring a different angle. But Raven Jeffries, you know, her case in Detroit, she went missing out of Southwest Detroit, and then her body found in Romulus. It's so close. It's so close. They just need that one piece of the puzzle. And I think sometimes, because these cases can fade from the headlines, if we can start to push them again, then we're going to. So when you talk to the detectives involved in this, everyone says they know exactly who did it. And I would, as a mom,
Oh,
could you imagine that?
yeah.
Like, you know who killed your kid and they're still out there. And she ended up losing her other 2 kids. So she's lost 3 of her 5 children. And the 3 of them have been connected to this one guy in some way. And, and not that the 2 sons, he had anything to do with their death, but how do you sleep at night? And, this detective is like, we need this case reopened, and to be able to get to some of these retired detectives and have them speak to us so openly, because when you work for a police department, you can't. And there's still, a level that we have to work with them. Like that source, I had worked with him for, like you said, Alysia, weeks, if not months, to get him to trust me. To go on the record and tell us some of the things. And now we're hoping that this pushes the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office to take a new look at this case. And on the backside, time sometimes changes things.
Yeah.
But also it's, because I've talked to him, and he doesn't want to talk. So then you just start plastering his neighborhood with murder posters. Do you know anything? Because neighbors have to know something. Someone knows something.
That's how
and
Ronnie spent her weekend, by the way, putting
Yeah.
up missing persons reporters in the suspect's neighborhood.
Oh my gosh.
So these cases follow us home. This isn't a job. This
Yeah.
is really our lives. So, this is something we're committed to. And I know Ronnie's hard work on that case, I believe it's going to lead to answers. And I think that's going to be a big thing. We really want one of our cases to be solved that we've done. There's so many that are so close, and those are the ones we wanted to put out first, because they all require, like she said, one little piece of evidence, one person to say something, and it's solved. They have everything else. They just need that little piece. And that's what reaching a bigger audience is so helpful with. It's great. It's this new way to reach people is unprecedented and amazing.
Let's say what I want to know, what's your ratio of getting either retired police officials or anybody who has information in the law enforcement community, whether it be active or retired? What's your ratio of them talking to you versus people that say, no, I'm not talking to you?
Ronnie, can you say our motto, please?
we love retired detectives.
Yeah.
That is our motto. For us, I think the big thing that's really helped us bridge the gap and makes us different than other reporters as well is that I did have the opportunity to work for a federal law enforcement agency. So I've been behind that blue wall. And it was very uncomfortable at first because there is a large distrust between the media and law enforcement. And, as someone who's been a public information officer, I see why I've been misquoted. I've been cited and quoted, even though they never talked to me. I've seen, my words twisted, and I understand law enforcement's, for the most part, mistrust of the media. And I get it. Like, I remember going to our first meeting. It was a, chiefs of police meeting. Every law enforcement agency in the state of Michigan is there, and I'm there, and people started recognizing me as a member of the media. And they're like, why is she there? What is she doing here? Blah, blah, blah. Like, I felt like I was going to be tarred and feathered. I was like sinking down. I was like, oh my God. And, it took my SAC, the special agent in charge who hired me, Robin Shoemaker, to say, no, she's one of us. And really made it a point to gain that trust of the law enforcement agency. So it wasn't just her trust, but I had to get the trust of every single agent within our office. And I covered the state of Michigan and then covered Chicago for a while. But as part of my duties, I had to do recruiting. And doing recruiting, I had to go to job fairs constantly, which put me in direct contact with every local state police agency out there. And it really was reinforcing who we are as members of the media, which then of course then leads to the media training and teaching them, the things that I've had on both sides of the spectrum. You've got to find your members of the media that you trust with your information. And it's not to say you don't manipulate them, but there are they just don't get things right. Like sometimes the basic things like calling us FBI when we're ATF. If you can't get if you can't get 3 letters right, and the crazy thing about that too is I brought ATF, I brought them into the Fox 2 studios and we did this huge, behind the scenes trying to build that bridge between law enforcement and media. Them explaining their mission, why they can't tell things, but then the media explaining why they need the information and this, that, and the other. And everyone walks away, you're happy, things seem to be good. The next week, we gave that station an exclusive interview on one of our federal cases, had him in our ATF office, which interviewed the agent with the ATF Detroit backdrop.
Yeah.
Oh.
And he still supered him, or, the graphic was FBI.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh, you just undid everything I did. It's the biggest no-no. So then I had to call him up and say, oh my God, you made this huge mistake. We're not FBI, we're ATF. Please correct it for 11. And they made the same mistake at 11.
Oh my God.
I was like, I'm done. I'm done. So it's a trust issue.
Yeah.
And we spend a lot of times. Go ahead, Alysia.
Okay, I'll talk. We spend a lot of time. I'm trying to think exactly what Ronnie was saying. I can say that we definitely probably speak with current officers more because they're the ones who have the case. We like to speak with both. So we like to speak with the officers that are handling the case now. If there is one, sometimes it's piling up in a cold case filing cabinet somewhere and they have to pull it out and dust it off. And I love that because then it gives a renewed interest in the case. And they're like, oh, the media is tracking this down. We better look into this again. So there's that. And then we also like to get the perspective from the retired detective that had the original case. What did they see? What did they hear? What do they think now? They're often able to be much more candid. That's why our motto is we love retired detectives, is because they tell you the things that the other guy who's currently working on the case or girl can't say.
Yeah.
Right.
Would love to, but can't. Like they'll name suspects. In our Bernita White episode, he says, the husband did it. I sleep well at night knowing that. Just because he wasn't arrested, I know he did it. And here's why.
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, it's like, okay, no officer who's currently in that position would be able to do that. But I think it's refreshing. It's refreshing for the audience to be like, okay, this is what they were actually thinking.
Yeah.
So that's why we thought it was really important in our podcast to include interviews with some of the key players in the case, whether it be the detectives, family members, whoever has a big impact. We like to include that so that our audience can hear straight from the horse's mouth rather than us telling them what they said. It's sometimes the emotion behind what they say is even more moving than what they're actually saying.
But what people don't understand, and even new journalists, this is one of the things you want to teach them, is news doesn't happen in front of the camera from 9 to 5. It's about relationships, and these officers and detectives and, sources come from all levels. Some of my best sources in Detroit were, postal carriers or DTE linemen, but detectives, and they come from all different levels, but it all comes down to relationships, and you have to take time to cultivate those relationships. So in the case, you're not just getting this detective to say, hey, yeah, I'll talk. No, it's countless phone calls and, a lot of times meeting them in person for them to like you and to trust you and to feel comfortable enough with you that what they're about to tell you, you're going to relay their information in an honest and open way. And that, I think, is what sets us apart from so many of the other podcasts.
How many batches of cookies would you say it usually takes?
Oh my gosh.
And where are mine?
She's still
So-
better. She's still better.
Well, you know, it's funny because not very recently, Ronnie was doing something and I'm like, where are you? She's like, at PD. And I'm like, oh, are you getting information? She's like, yeah. And she sounded like kind of like she was shuffling around. I'm like, what's going on? She's like, oh, I'm carrying a big basket that I made up for them with like goodies and candy. And I was like, are you serious? Like, you are literally bribing them. And guess what? It worked.
Yeah.
We got the documents. So I should start doing that. I should start doing that. But I do want her to bring me something also. So
Well, yeah.
It's, I had I ran into this officer from Detroit PD a few months ago, and he's like, hey, your oatmeal raisin cookies are just the best. I have to have that recipe. And I'm like, yeah, I buy them at Kroger, but I didn't tell him this. I said, it's a family secret. I can't give it to you. But I would buy them at Kroger and then put them in these cute little bags with bows and then my card hanging from it.
Oh my gosh.
And then deliver them around to everyone. And they think they're like homemade. And I'm like, oh, that's a family secret. I can't, I'm sorry. I can't share it.
I have a feeling that if we tried to make cookies and give them to police departments, it would not go over as well.
No.
They'd be like, oh my God, never talk to these girls again. Never.
I did one year for Christmas. I was working Christmas. And so that's what I did is I just, had a bunch of cookies and I was trying to make the cute reindeer ones. You go on Pinterest, Lani, you get this, right? You go on Pinterest and they look so cute. The little, antlers with the pretzels and the little nose. They were even the cut ones, like you just cut and bake them and then shape them. I burned probably so many things of them. I was like, oh my God.
Back to Kroger.
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
how we didn't get that story.
Well, I say one of the people that we are still very interested in interviewing is a retired detective, male, female, out of the game for 20 years, out of the game for 5 years. So
You got to get Murph.
Yeah,
Oh my
Murph.
God, you guys know Murph
Murph.
with the Toledo Police Department. He retired. Oh my God.
Oh,
Captain Murphy. He's retired. I'm going to hunt him down for you guys. I'm going to get him for you. He
She will bring him
was
cookies.
awesome.
I mean, I can go to Kroger too.
yeah.
Yeah, that's all you need to do, apparently. It's all about the delivery.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to find Murph for you. So I know he retired probably about 6-7 years ago,
Okay.
but he had so much time on Toledo PD, he'd say whatever he wanted, and he gave us the best sound bite. So when you're a reporter, the sound bite is at 6 to 8 seconds, and he'd be like, cops like to talk in that cop speak. He fled to the north on foot. He'd be like, that scoundrel ran down the road. And
Oh, wow.
Murph was awesome. And I remember doing the story about people parking illegally in handicapped parking spots.
Yeah.
So we, did the hidden camera and chase people down, this, that, and the other. And we needed to go out with an officer to legitimize the story. And Toledo PD at that time, no, right, whatever. Murph's like, I gotcha, come with me. We go with him. He slaps some tickets on people. And you're just like,
Yeah.
he was a soundbite machine. I'm going to find him for you because you
That
want
would
to
be
talk about
awesome.
someone who has stories. Murph would have stories.
We came across somebody but they said they had way too much PTSD from
Yeah.
it and didn't want to talk. So
Mm.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very real. And Ronnie has brought that up on the show before about how it's not just the families that, have PTSD and grieve. It's these detectives, they're living with it and they're seeing the worst part of human nature out there.
Yeah.
These homicide detectives, especially. And it's sex crimes also. It gets very difficult for them. And you can see that when you go, a lot of them have old case files in their homes, in their desks that
Oh.
they still go through and try to solve. These cases don't leave when they retire either. I mean, we relate to that because that's why we wanted to do this show, is because we couldn't forget about the cases. But imagine the detectives who tried to solve it, who tried to bring justice to families and wasn't able to get that closure. They're still living with it.
Yeah.
It's difficult, especially the ones that know who did it.
Right.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and the district attorneys or the prosecutors wouldn't take the case on for whatever reason, didn't feel like they could, had enough to win in court, which sometimes it's just that easy if there's too much circumstantial evidence, whatever, but they feel like they know who did it. And that guy they may see at the grocery store and they're like, you killed a child, it's like, oh, that'd be so hard.
Yeah. I can't even imagine
Let's
what
say,
they would go through.
with that said, probably my last question is, we're going to be running out of time here soon, but is there anything that you guys will not cover, or is there anything that really shocks you and you just kind of sit there and shake your head, or just completely makes you take a step back?
I mean, I can say for me, I think that the Marcus Wesson murder, who raped children and then killed them, that case was the worst of the worst. And I mean, I truly believe I stared evil in the face when I was with him. And so I think that has set the bar pretty high for me. I don't know that anything would shock me after that case. So I don't think we would shy away from anything. I think if there's a family who needs answers and their case isn't getting it, and we have the opportunity to present it, I think that we would take on that challenge and just maybe do it a little more carefully.
Okay.
I think too, with that, the one thing I would say to the families, it's hard, but you have to be an advocate. You have to stay on the officer's ass. Continue to call the police department. Be a pain in their ass. Make sure they don't forget your case or your loved one's case, because they're so overworked and understaffed. But if you're that person that is constantly coming around, they're not going to forget you. So that would be my one thing to say to people out there is, be an advocate for your family member.
Well, thank you guys. This was enlightening. It was fun. It was dark. It was good though.
It's everything we wanted it to be.
Yeah.
So
Good.
you guys are great. We're going to look forward to, Lanie's going to look forward to binging on more of your episodes when you
Yes.
have them up and running.
And I want to check out your book too. What's the name of that?
Oh, great. It's called, the hardcover was called Where Hope Begins, and then the paperback is Deadly Devotion. It's actually the same book, so sometimes some places have them differently, but
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we'll put that in our show notes too.
Great.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
It was
Thanks
nice
for
meeting
having
both
us.
of you.
Yes, nice
know.
meeting
Same
you
here,
too.
Same here.
We're fans of yours as well. So when we
Thank you.
need a little bit of like lightheartedness when we're covered in hard cases, it's nice that we can tune into you guys and get a little breath of fresh air.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Well, hey, we want to listen. We want everyone to thank you for your time this time. Until next time. Thank you, ladies.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.